Welcome back to Bending the Narrative. Each week, we dive into Netflix's Avatar: The Last Airbender live action series. And while you can find our overall thoughts on the season in our first episode, throughout book one, we will be discussing in further detail how each episode compares to its live action counterpart. Since very few elements from this episode make it into the live action adaptation, we're going to discuss the consequences of this and how it affects both versions of the series. Kate, let's start with you.
So what does happen from these episodes in the live action is they have the scroll and they have the whistle, but
Mhm.
they obtain them in very different ways. I think the waterbending scroll they just have.
Yeah,
Grand
they get that from
Grand,
Gran at the beginning.
yeah, gives it to them at the beginning, which it makes sense. That actually that works. I'm like, okay,
Mhm.
that does make sense. That works. I'll let you have that one.
Yeah.
The whistle is given to Aang by Boomy, which also that's another one. Where I'm like, okay, that
It
works. I
make
like it. I'm not hating
it makes
that.
sense because he gets in the animated series he gets the whistle by using a coin that he gets from Boomy, so it's like kind of
Oh, so it kind of
it
works.
it
Yeah.
does come from Boomy kind of still. Like I thought about that while I was doing
That's a
this
good
rewatch. I
point.
was
That's a
like,
good
oh, I
point.
mean, like it does in a roundabout way still come from Boomy, so like okay, it works. But yeah, those are the only two things basically from this
Those are really oh,
episode.
and then there's Katara practicing by the water,
hmm Yeah.
but that's it.
Which is like that's not really like an episode thing. That's just a like she should be practicing
She
waterbending
should be
anyways.
practicing water bending. Yeah.
Yeah,
And
that's
she
her
doesn't
whole
really
thing.
teach Aang.
Teaches
Aang
her.
comes and teaches her how to waterbend, even though he
hmm
doesn't waterbend at all and she waterbends. But
Yeah.
maybe I'm just being a hater, whatever.
I mean, like it's one of those things where he does in the anime, like they are able to teach each other, right? Like it's
Hmm.
she's the one who's like, I'll help you learn waterbending, and then he just is
He
really
picks
good
it
at
up
it
so
naturally.
fast.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then so because of that, he's like able to in turn help her some and be like, oh hey, this is like what I did. And so they're able to it's that like symbiosis of them like going off of each other and like
Hmm.
working together, which is good, but the main thing that you kind of lose by not having this episode as a whole is one, the pirates. They're all cool
I
and
know.
them
They're
getting
cool.
axed is ridiculous. Like, come on, how are you gonna cut
Stuff
pirates
go
from your
boom.
show? Like,
Yeah.
that's such a good, like that's a win in like any medium in any story or whatever. Like, pirates are rad. Like, everyone loves to hate them. Like,
It's
I
just
mean,
cool.
listen, not that I'm advocating for like piracy, but like they're cool to see. I mean,
Don't
like,
don't pirate. Dress
but
up as a
also,
pirate. Pirate
yeah, exactly,
outfits?
yeah,
Pirate vibes? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
that's a win
Like
across the
that's a
board.
win.
That they're just such strong characters. Like there's a
It's
reason
so
the
fair.
Pirates of the Caribbean movies slap, and that we're
Slap.
getting more of them
Yes.
eventually. Still, like come on,
We are?
who? Do, yeah, they're
That's
like,
another
I mean,
podcast,
they're in
but
development and stuff, but yeah, that's a different different thing. Um, but I mean, yeah, who doesn't love seeing pirates show up and stuff? Like you're like,
right?
oh, cool, this is the pirate thing or the pirate
And like
episode or whatever.
they also initiate great fights. They let the
hmm
gang use their powers and their smarts in different ways than we've seen before.
Yeah,
And so many little things that now
you
it's
you
replaced
lose
by
Aang
people
being like,
standing and talking.
yeah, and you
Ah,
lose Aang
yes,
being
more people
like,
standing and talking.
we be casting off now. Like, come on.
We'd be casting off
You're
now.
gonna cut that from your show? Come on. Uh, but no, more seriously, the thing that you really lose is the development for both. Well, one Zuko gets some development here, but
Yes,
then and like the Iroh, like White Lotus of it all gets
we
a
get
little bit
that
of
drop.
subtle
Hmm.
development that if you're in the know, you're in the know, which will come back later. But like
Feel know.
you just you lose a lot of the Katara and Aang development that they get because it's
Hmm.
important. Like this again is a very like Katara gets a lot of growth here
It's a
as she
very
did in
guitar centric
Imprisoned,
episode.
which they also cut.
Hmm.
You she it's her anger and her emotions getting the better of her, like you were saying, and like her needing to learn from that. And again, it's like this episode is to her in a lot of ways how the other earlier episodes are for Aang in seeing the consequences of not being responsible and like being
Yeah,
like doing what they should be doing and like immediately learning from that. Like she's being selfish and thinking about herself and they all get captured and they have to deal with that.
yeah,
And like that's a very real immediate consequence of her blowing off her responsibilities. And it's also a nice flip because at the beginning of the episode, you see them get to the waterfall, and Aang wants to like mess around with Appa, and she's like, "Hey, don't forget why we're here." And he immediately is like, "Oh
yes.
yeah, you're right,"
Oh
and
yeah, he's like,
goes
oh yeah.
goes to do what they're supposed to do. So like you get that growth from him, but then you see her kind of on the flip, like now it's her turn to learn from that, and like realize that they have more important things to do and don't need to be it's important to not be selfish in that and not let your
Yes.
like petty like, oh, I'm annoyed that you're doing this thing that I'm supposed to be good at like way better than me immediately. Like that's frustrating. And so you lose
Yeah, and
that
like
by
by
not.
losing that, we'd lose so much of Katara's growth and so much of her
Hmm.
personality. And I think that's the biggest complaint about the live action adaptation is that we
Hmm.
lose Katara completely. Like
Yeah, I mean,
she just becomes exactly like I think the creation of Katara and what the creators were thinking is the exact opposite of what she became in the live action. They're like, we don't want a little like a quiet little girl who sits and isn't allowed to feel her rage and her emotions. Like
mhm.
the creator said, the Katara is an example of let girls feel their rage and let young women be able to let this out without the standard and like guys feel their emotions and be sad. And we see that a lot. We see Katara yell and be
Yeah.
angry,
Yeah,
but we
like
learn that she has to control that. Like she
that's such a
can't
good
let it get the
moment. Like
best of her. Yeah.
you lose her just completely getting like going off on
Mhm.
Aang and then immediately like seeing the ramifications of that. And then also like that develops their bond more too because you see like how deeply he reacts to her doing
Mhm.
that. And like you just don't get that. I literally have such a hard time even trying to think about who she is as a character in the live action show. Like she's
Yes.
just there.
She's
She
just
just
there. She
she
just
just
kind of
exists
and the
and that's
actress
it.
is great. I've seen her in other
Hmm.
things. And the other movie that she's in, like I know she's a good actress. I don't think
Hmm.
it's her. I think it's the writing.
Yeah.
Mostly, they just leave out everything that makes Katara Katara. They don't let her be angry. They don't let her yell. They don't let her experience these emotions. They don't let her be the leader for a little bit. You know, she's just
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. I
The
guess I'll go here now.
the thing that they give her ironically is the thing that they didn't need to where they just really emphasize, and this is not to say that the loss of her mother isn't a super pivotal part of her character because
Hmm.
obviously that's like her touchstone and building block for a lot of her stuff, right? But
Yeah.
like that's not growth, that's backstory,
That's
right?
backstory.
And
Oh,
like
period.
they
Period.
focus on that, like they spend 20 minutes in the spirit world episode being like this is like they give Katara screen time but in the wrong way.
In the
It's
wrong
not
way.
you're
You put it into
focusing
words.
like you're
Yes.
focusing on the past, which is as again as the animated series continues to tell us like you don't need to dwell on the past, you need to like work on the present and the
Work on
future
the
and making
present.
it better. And like they
Bars,
just
Alex. Bars.
they just they don't like no, you need the growth. You don't like we know what happened in her past. We know how that's impacted her and shaped her. How can then that make her better in the future and how can she grow from that? How can we put her in situations
Yes.
where she has to actively grow in these new ways, in these new directions? And they just
They
don't do
just
that.
they just don't do
They're
that.
like,
They
oh,
just dwell on the past.
we'll literally
Exactly.
instead we'll cut those episodes completely.
Yeah, they're like,
Like
we don't need this.
we don't need them.
Mm, we need to
We need
focus
stuff
on
from book
Iroh.
two.
And yeah, we need stuff from book 2 in here. We need Azula and the other girls just sitting there doing nothing. Hey, Aspect listener. Enjoying the show?
Then be sure to subscribe here on The Aspect so you never miss an episode.
And check out more episodes and clips on our playlist here.
Thanks so much for watching, and
Blamio Hot Man.